pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Who can do the prayer? Anybody here?
I can do it.
Okay.
Heavenly Father, Lord, we just want to pause for a moment and say thank you for your grace. Pray, Lord, to get back to the Squadron, keep us safe, and allow us to have the meeting here and learn something new.
Thank you, sir. All right, well, I wanted to go over a couple of items. One item is I recommended Andre for commander here, and he likes that idea. However, the group commander has an advertisement out for a commander for here. And he said that before he accepts Andre's application, that he would like to wait until the end of the month, which is the advertisement that he has out, to see if anybody else actually puts in an application. Personally, I don't think anybody will, but so he's not going to make a decision until that happens. Terry and I have to write recommendation letters and send it to. So that's just so you know, you're not commander yet, but we're working on it. So yeah, we're hoping that you can. So we don't want some stranger in there, really. So you did finance meetings. Did you get everybody's response?
Not yet. I only sent it to you and Terry.
Okay, so make sure you tell Terry he needs to respond back.
Yeah, I saw that and I will respond.
Yeah.
I meant to do it today and I just didn't.
Just make sure you get it in the log so we can, our SUI is coming up in June. So we have to have a copy of all of our finance meetings, and they have to be, so often. I think every quarter we have to have one. So, yeah, we need to fill in the blank somehow. So, anyway, we're supposed to have a couple of new members. We have one that made it here. I don't know, the other one hasn't made it yet. Has a what? Oh, no. I had two people that called me on the phone about 30 minutes ago, an hour ago, and said they were coming. So one made it. I don't see the other one yet. So.
And I have two online right now, Tim and George.
Tim and George. Okay, good. We'll mark them on the log there. Just so you know,
yes.
that I started a new job yesterday, Monday, and I have to work 8 hours a day like everybody else now. So I won't be available to do special training during the week. I'll have to do it at weekends now. So anything else, maybe flight releases I could do without anybody getting excited, but I won't be able to do too much for CAP during the week. Anyway, Terry, you want to take it?
You want to talk about the aircraft? What's going on?
Well, I don't know about the aircraft, what's going on. We're waiting for the swap for the 887 and 743 Charlie Papa to be swapped. They're identical sister airplanes, and they said they were going to do it last week, swap them out, but something happened, and nobody's actually communicated with me yet.
Just in a larger sense, do you know where we are with Cap 437 in terms of the repairs?
I don't have an update on that. We were still June, July.
He's in the hand.
Yeah, we were still June, July completion date last I heard, so that's all I know. Any questions about anything I talked about? Welcome, Mr. New Member.
New member has a name. Scott.
I was going to let you embarrass him, not me.
So I've already given him the ask for the 411. So welcome, Scott. Kind of disappointing no one's here because I was really going to go into mission pilot topic tonight because
Tim and George.
Tim's on there. Tim's in the onboarding program. By the way, before we start, does
And
anybody
Rodney.
recognize the fact that Andre is a freshly minted CAP pilot now? Anybody mention? They gave you the glory last week? Okay. All right. If you want to get that shirt embroidered with your CAP wings, after the meeting,
Ken Tharp and sorry, Terry.
Sure.
Tim Takahashi.
There is the outfit that I believe that does the wings for Vanguard, actually here in Riverside,
Rodney?
the auto center. You can drop that shirt off and get your wings and work on.
And Ken Tharp.
Ken Tharp, okay. Good to see you, Ken.
So
So,
Rodney Delgado, the guy that's sitting in the front over there.
yeah,
He's online. Tim Thurp,
okay, Rob.
George Takahashi.
Good.
I would imagine Jessica's with Rodney.
All right, well, tonight I was going to talk about mission pilots, since we seem to have some good momentum with new pilots coming into the squadron. And obviously, they want to fly for Civil Air Patrol. And the best way they can do that is to become a mission pilot. Why do I say that's the best way? There are other ways to fly for Civil Air Patrol. Okay? This CAP pilots requirements that I keep over here on the board lists the various roles of Civil Air Patrol pilot, including just the rank of CAP pilot, but doesn't really allow you to do too much. I mean, essentially, if you are just Form 5 in an airplane, in other words, if you take a check ride in an airplane, you're qualified to fly the airplane, essentially, you can fly funded missions, or unfunded missions, unfunded missions. So you can fly a C mission. What's a C mission? Training, essentially, but it's all really done on dime. The next step up from being just a CAP pilot would be a transport pilot. Again, limited in your role. You could fly transport missions. And what is a transport mission? Anybody have an idea what a transport mission might be for Civil Air Patrol, what it looks like?
Transport the aircraft from one airport to another.
That's actually something that's done probably most often, right? A9, maintenance, where they need a crew to go pick up somebody from either they dropped off an airplane or they're dropping it off. So that's one way you could participate as a CAP pilot, as a transport pilot. You could fly hybrid is another, okay? And then true transport missions where we're flying blood or organs or dogs or VIPs. But I can tell you I've been in CAP now for 30 years and I've never flown blood, I've never flown organs, I've never flown dogs, but I've never flown a VIP. Okay? So you could say that that's part of the profile, but that's the reality, that's not going to happen. So the best way that you can, and then as a transport pilot, if you get the add-on, you could fly cadet O-rides. But really, the meat of CAP flying is with the mission pilot. And let's look at the different missions the mission pilot can fly. Anybody have any idea? That's a big one, right? SAR, search and rescue, okay?
Counter drug.
There's two kinds of search and rescue. There's mountain screen and non-mountain screen. They distinguish between the two pilots. So for tonight's conversation, I'm talking about a mission pilot that is 7,500 MSL and below. In other words, not mountain qualified. Okay, it's going to take some doing to get you mountain qualified because that's essentially a school that you got to go through and not available all the time. So we'll just talk about non-mountain qualified. SAR, anybody else have it on the mission that can fly?
Counter drug.
Counter drug. Now there's additional requirements of counter drug, namely you have to be in CAP 2 years before you start flying. That doesn't mean you have to be in 2 years before you can fly. About 1 year and 9 months into your CAP career, put in your Form 83, Group 3 counter drug officer to get employed. And then by the time your 2-year anniversary comes, you'll get your FBI background check, all that will be done, and you qualify. What's the other mission that we fly?
WADS.
Western Air Defense Sector. Okay? By the way, you can say SAR, but I'm going to break out something over here and add ELT as something different than SAR. Because you have an awful lot of ELT missions that don't turn into search and rescue. Okay? Can be, but for the most part, ELT is something that you generally call out. It's here in the basin, so if it was to be an aircraft that would crash, somebody would probably found it, right? It's not like an airplane fall out of the side and downtown LA, nobody knows about it. So PLT in the basin, probably something with our landing in the airport, or somebody who bought a PLT or swap features, been turning on and off, they don't know what it is. There's just a million different reasons why PLT could be going on. So PLT is one of our more prominent missions. Anybody else have any other missions?
ELT is an acronym for
Emergency located transit. Never aircraft. So, generally it goes, it's designed to go off if there's a crash in the aircraft. But it go off on hard days as well. Or just if someone's fooling around. Any other missions that we fly? Perfect. This is actually probably going to be the biggest mission going forward with the civil aviation. Is actually the topic of fire mission, okay, so that could incorporate fire, earthquake, flooding, anything that you could think of, disaster relief, or national emergency, by the way. When Santana 1000, I believe that's the acronym, Santana 1000 is the Opera 1000, excuse me. And that was after 9/11, Opera 1000 back then, all civil aircraft. The only aircraft flying, the military aircraft, the civil aircraft. So DR photography, this is a big one going forward. Cadet O-Rides. I'll put them in here.
Jessica has joined us.
Hello, Jessica. You can also fly transport. Any other missions? How you doing? Any other missions that you fly? You fly training missions. It's actually a good point because as a mission pilot, you have many more proficiency dollars available to you than as a mission transport pilot. The mission transport pilot can fly one transport and should be one proficiency course every 2 months, funded. The mission pilot can fly one every 30 days. Okay, so once a month, you fly 2 hours, free of charge, as a mission pilot. So this probably lists most of them. There's probably some that I'm missing out there. These names. Okay. SAR, CD, WADs. I'm going to kind of go through some of these here. But you can see, I guess my point is, if you're a transport pilot, right, you can fly this one right here. You might be able to fly some training once every 2 months. And if you've got enough hours, you can fly O-Rides. Pretty much leaves out a lot, right? So it should be everybody's goal to become a mission pilot. So let's talk about the prerequisites to becoming a mission pilot. Anybody have an idea what the pilot requirements are exactly? What is that? Oh, microphone. Wow, this is fancy. Fancy like Applebee. Okay. All right, mission pilot. So the first thing you've got to do is you've got to become, you'd have to have 200 hours of PIC, okay, and 50 hours across country. You've got to be a transport pilot. You also have to be a mission scanner, okay? And so back in the day, before you became a mission pilot, you also had to go through the extra step of becoming an observer. So that's really a lot of steps. But also back in the day, the training was driven down to the lowest level, the squadron. Right now, all the training is driven up, it seems like, to the highest level, the group. Okay? So it's really difficult to get some of these training flights in, as maybe you guys saw during that Group 3 SARX. So 200 hours PIC and 50 hours cross country. If you had that and you joined Civil Air Patrol, and you get a Form 5, okay, you become a transport pilot right away, because you only needed 100 hours to be a transport, but you got 200. You can start flying cadets because you're at that magic number for cadets, okay, but separately you can start training toward mission pilot. And the very first step that I require for everybody is they've got to start their scanner training immediately, okay? So, CAP, besides meaning come and pay, okay, it also kind of means the same thing with your time. I will invest as much time with you as you invest in the organization. I'll give you an example. We had a very motivated member here last summer, Emma Ragoberascaletta. I don't know what her married name is yet, or what it is, but that's, anyway, Emma, very motivated, got through all of the book stuff, got through all of that, and wanted to fly, and, I set aside time, and we got her through scanner, observer, and almost to signed off pilot in like the shortest amount of time ever I could think of. So there's resources. All that I'm saying is that for some of the new people out there that are watching, online, or you've got a good resource here. I am willing to go out and train you guys, especially if I see that level of enthusiasm. Okay, and part of it starts before you get in the cockpit with me. It starts with me seeing that you're interested in becoming a scanner. Some of this stuff is boring. Okay, you're a pilot. It's asking you to locate a point on a chart. That's pretty boring stuff for pilots. So a lot of this scanner stuff, it may be boring, but it also shows a commitment back to the organization here that you want to step forward. So, all right. So some of the other things you needed to get into the mission pilot training, you need the ICUT, which is the Introduction to Communication Users Training, which is basically CAP radios. You'll need the CAP 117 Emergency Services Part 2, some FEMA training, and then you start getting into the squidders for the mission pilot, FAM, and prep and all that. All of this is written down. There's nothing to memorize here. Everybody that's in the organization now, that's in the pilot training program, has this pilot requirements document. It's an easy guideline to take you through all of that. So that's kind of how you get there. So once you're there, I just wanted to maybe share with you some of the flying that you'll be doing, or what's going to be expected of you. So anybody have an idea what kind of search patterns that you're expected to fly as let's say, a mission pilot on a search and rescue exercise or wheel? A parallel search, okay? Okay, parallel track.
I also have William Haggett just joined us. Thank you.
Okay. That's Billy. Okay. Okay, parallel track. Anybody else? There's probably 10 of them. How many? We got sector. Creepy line. Contour. Good.
Aurora.
You lost me on that one. Okay, expanding square. Maybe you're saying something that you're naming it something I haven't.
What's your favorite one? You probably said one.
No. Parallel track, creeping line. Let's say route search. Let's see, sector, expanding square, parallel track, creeping line. Anybody think of any others? Did I say contour? ELT. It's very distinct.
North, south, east, west.
So I'm gonna break ELT into two parts. I'm gonna say a Becker, and then I'm gonna say the second one is gonna be wing blanking. Okay, which is essentially a method of triangulation to a fix. And I'm going to try to go through all of these and tell you a little bit about what each one of these are tonight. But There's wing blanking, there's ELT, there's also photography. There's probably something called a circle, which I have not used. Let me see here if I'm missing one. So that's a creeping line search. So this one right here and this one right here are the most ubiquitous search patterns that we fly. Okay? And it's going to depend on the terrain that you are covering as to which one of these techniques that you would employ. But essentially, all of these different patterns you're going to have to learn and be able to fly proficiently. I will say that there's some commonality between all of them. You're going to fly at 90 knots, indicated airspeed. Okay? You're going to fly 10 degrees of flaps. You're going to fly at 1,000 feet AGL. You're going to fly, you could be flying, okay, not on all of them, but you're flying true headings. What does that mean? Anybody know what a true heading is versus a magnetic heading? True north, okay, so in the airplane we're flying an HSI that gives us a magnetic heading, right? How do we convert that to a true heading if we're flying in a grid? We simply look at the chart and we look at the line that shows the magnetic variance in that area. Around here it's something like 11.5 degrees of magnetic variance.
14, I thought.
It changes, yeah, it could be 14, you know, it changes like as you get closer or further away from the pole. So if we were flying, let's say we wanted to fly a true south heading and the magnetic variance is 14 degrees east, what would your magnetic heading have to be to fly true south? It'd be 180 minus 14, so 166. So the mental exercise that you're going to have to do in your brain, okay, and we use this is in particularly with parallel track search, okay, because we're going to be in a 7.5 nautical mile by 7.5 nautical mile grid, quarter grid to be more specific.
Ken put in there adjusted for variation.
Okay? And so on the grid lines you see on your map, everything that you're flying on the map is true north and south. So to match that, we've got to adjust that in, so you'll see a line like that on the chart and it'll say 14 degrees. That's the line you're looking for. That gives you the magnetic variance right there. Okay? So let's just say it's one, so you'd be flying 166 south, right? East, you'd be flying 076, 346 north, and 256 west, right? So this is all something that you would do before you get in the airplane when you're briefing with your crew. And I might as well just take a minute since I've drawn this grid up here. What are some of the other considerations that you would make before you'd even go out and fly the grid? You want to know what the altitudes were, right, in the grid. Maybe you have mountains over here. Yeah. And, terrain over here. And maybe it graduates down to maybe a lake over here or something that's flat. Okay? So you'd have to get a plan of attack. So if you're going to have mountainous terrain in your grid and you're going to have lower terrain, flatter terrain, you're going to use a couple of different search techniques. Maybe you're going to use parallel track and you're going to use contour. Contour for the terrain and parallel track for the flatter spots. Okay? You're going to want to be able to identify your corners while you're here on the ground by some kind of a ground reference that you're going to be looking for when you're out there in the cockpit. Okay? One of the things I strongly recommend is for the scanners to pay close attention to something on the ground when you're identifying those corners, so that they can also know where they are. They have situational awareness while they're flying around. Sometimes you have other CAP aircraft in an adjacent grid, especially if there's a pretty strong conclusion that the aircraft is in this area. You don't want to be flying outside of your grid then, because that could conflict with another aircraft, right? So you're going to really want to stay inside of this grid. So it's going to be very important to pick out and identify and be able to recognize what that land feature is that keeps you inside of the grid. Everybody in the aircrew should know that, so that if for some reason the radios start getting busy with the observer and the pilot's getting traffic calls, and maybe all of a sudden we're about ready to fly outside of our grid because we're being distracted, the scanner looking outside says, hey, we're about ready to fly outside of our grid, right? So that's really an important safety consideration. So corners, you want to develop that. You want to identify any hazards in the grid. Are there power lines? Is it a bird sanctuary area? Are there gliders in the grid? Is there another airport, skydiving? All these different factors. What are the hazards? What are your outs? That seems logical, right? What if something goes bad, where is it that you're going to put the airplane down? Is there something that you can think of? Is there something that looks on here that is there a freeway that goes through there that you want to kind of keep it in gliding distance whenever you're in a certain part of the terrain? Or is there a lake bed? Obviously an airport is a good one. In fact, there's the grid that I give a lot of the mission pilots a checkout in has basically all of this stuff in there. So it's really high stress environment. So, but I'm looking for them to identify all of that before the flight, so that I know that they're thinking everything through, because there is a lot to think about. So corners, hazards, outs, and what's probably the number one thing when you're flying that you'd really like to know? Wind and weather, right? You want to know what the wind and weather is. So especially if it's mountainous terrain, okay? You want to know where that wind is coming from, because why? Updrafts, downdrafts, okay? Stuff like that. All right, so you need a little mini tutorial there on what you do before you get up in there. But let's talk about parallel track. What would be the reason that you would use a parallel track? It's because you're flying over basically a fairly consistently same MSL. Okay? You can be flying at 3,500 feet MSL and it's flat like in the high desert, right? It's 3,500 feet. So it's not the MSL that matters, it's the consistency of the MSL. So if it's consistently flat, you're using parallel track. Parallel track just is exactly what it sounds like. You fly a parallel track. Okay? So, do you guys know the difference between the degrees that are north and south versus the degrees that are east and west on a chart? 1 degree of longitude. And latitude, it's true at where? At the equator, and that's the only place that it's true. Okay? So if you have 7.5 minutes here, 7.5 degrees is also 7.5 nautical miles north and south. Generally speaking, if I can, I'd like to fly my parallel track north and south, because there's a couple things that I'm doing. I'm not going to rely on GPS. In fact, you can't rely on GPS. To get your mission pilot rating, you have to fly just to a grid, identify the quarters using dead reckoning and pilotage. Okay? You guys even know what dead reckoning and pilotage is? Do you guys remember what that is? You're going to have to remember. Okay? So during your mission pilot checkout, I'm not going to allow you to know that you're here via GPS. You're going to have to be here from dead reckoning and pilotage, right? So basically timing, dead reckoning, timing on the ground, knowing where your winds are coming from. If you're flying 90 knots at 7.5 miles, how long does that take you to fly it? If you're flying 1.5 miles a minute, 90 knots, 5 minutes. So it's a pretty easy calculation. So you start here, you set the timer, 5 minutes. Of course, we're assuming 90 knots. Indicated airspeed, or what are we considering? 90 knots ground speed, right? So it could get pretty intense for you on a check ride whenever, you know, I'm demanding that you're flying precisely. You're not allowed to fly out of the grid. You don't have any GPS reference. You want to fly 90 knots. Well, what if you have a 20 knot headwind? What's your indicated airspeed say? It says, huh? The indicator will be 90 knots, but what will your ground speed be? Right, 80 knots or 70 knots, so you'd be flying too slow. So the point is, there's things you've got to be taken into consideration here. And by the way, if you go below, I think it's 75 knots, it's for your reevaluation, okay? I'm trying to use the politically correct terms. You can't fail. And I'm trying to say a check ride, but it's not even a check ride. You did not pass your flight evaluation. I think that's how they say it. But anyway. So, 90 knots, 10 degrees of flaps. Power setting, by the way. 19 inches of manifold pressure. Full prop. Well, I'm going to take that back. I'm going to use the Turbo 206 because this is what hopefully you guys are going to be flying. Okay? If it was, let's just say, I don't know. So in the Turbo 206, you're going to bring the prop back from maximum power at takeoff back to 2,400 RPMs. Okay? So you'll fly 39 inches of manifold pressure and 2,400 RPMs and cruise. Out there. When you get out there, you come back to 19 inches of manifold pressure. You'll keep the prop right where it was before and 10 degrees of flaps. And that'll give you 90 knots of indicated airspeed. One of the things about the turbo aircraft, I know I'm jumping around here a lot, but you guys need to know this. One thing about the turbo aircraft, every single power change that you make, you'll need to make an adjustment to the mixture, more than likely. Okay? Because right now, if you have only 19 inches of manifold pressure and 2,400 RPMs, it's going to be way too rich to keep the turbine inlet temperature in the green. It's going to be too cold. So at this power setting, you'd have to roll the mixture back so that the turbine inlet temperature comes into the green. What happens then if you see that you got to push power, full power to the wall? What would you have to do? You'd have to enrich in that, right? So you'd have to enrich it up before you put the power in, all right? Something to think about there. But these power settings are pretty true for any airplane, whether it's a 182, a 206, or a Turbo 206. About 19 inches of manifold pressure, 10 degrees of flaps, okay, and the prop where it was after takeoff as you rolled it back, okay? And that'll give you a good search configuration right there. So you fly along here at your true heading, okay, 1,000 feet AGL, and at here you'll make a standard rate turn, okay? And a standard rate turn will give you about a 1 nautical mile track spacing, and that's what we're looking for right here, okay? About 1 nautical mile track spacing, so you'd have around 6 legs going through here, okay? So that's a parallel track search in a nutshell. A contour search, we're not going to be worried about headings right now. We're going to be worried about following the terrain. So this is the easiest way to kind of depict it. If all mountains were that perfect, right? That's what you'd be doing. But you'd be going down at 500-foot increments. Again, we have this 1,000-foot AGL requirement. How do you keep that, right? Sometimes it's pretty tough, okay? Because the train under you is going like this too. It's not like it's just everything's perfect. So we want to try to keep that 1,000 feet, and we want to keep about 500 to 750 feet lateral, something like that. Okay? So as we come here to this mountain, we'll come down, we'll drop down 500 feet, we'll go here, we'll drop down another 500 feet, and that's how we'll do the contour search. Again, using the same setup, 90 knots, 10 degrees of flaps, and 1,000 feet AGL. By the way, there are some circumstances to which you could go down to 500 feet during the search, but you'd have to get permission to do that in advance. Okay? So we talked about parallel track. We've talked about contour. Let's talk about sector and expanding square. What do you think that these search patterns could be used for? Anybody have any idea what they could be used for?
Finding a missing airplane.
Well, that's true. Has anybody heard of the term LKP? A last known position, right? Have you guys heard of our cell phone forensics teams that we have out there? They're becoming so accurate with the work that they do.
With the data that we get now,
It's just incredible. So
we can quickly find any day.
most of the actual SARs that we've been on lately have given us a very accurate LKP, or last known position. All right? And so we're going to use a sector or an expanding square. They're basically the same purpose. I don't think it matters. I'm going to take that back. I'm not going to say you're using true, okay, on this. But you go a half mile, you go another half mile, you go a mile. So these are 1 mile legs, right? Or this is a mile and a half. And it'd be something like this. We're expanding it out. Okay? A sector search is a lot easier to fly, and it's the one that I prefer if I know that the aircraft is in a defined area. You're basically flying over the defined area in half mile like this.
You can do that with your knee.
Yeah. We'll talk about that. But it's a way to fly over and over the same area. You're flying outbound, turning back around. And this is I'd say about a half a mile on all this. All of this is about half mile legs. You can change up. Again, you're doing all this, by the way, keeping a constant airspeed. You're doing engine management. You're listening for approach control. You're managing conversation in the cockpit. You're managing wind. You're managing the stress of looking for other aircraft, regardless of what's being told to you on SoCal. So that kind of gets back to, one of the things I was going to talk about is the role. What is really the role of the mission pilot, if I put it in that context? Safety is the number one thing for all of us, right? But mission pilot, his or her job is to get you there to the mission site, okay, and put his crew or her crew in the best position possible to manage that mission. What am I leaving out there? I'm leaving out something like searching too, right? Like the mission pilot does not search. Do not look out the window. That is not your job, to look out the window for the objective. Your job is to look out the window for other aircraft. Your job is to fly the aircraft safely with all the distractions that are going on, to fly the aircraft precisely, to fly it professionally. But your job is not to search. And your job is to get your crew home safely. And so that's probably the number one thing that I look for. And I'll just back up. I'm a mission check pilot examiner. What does that mean? It means that I check out mission check pilots, okay? And then mission check pilots check out mission pilots. So at DOV, where we start with, when we're looking for people that are evaluators we're looking for people that can evaluate judgment first and foremost. Okay? Form 5 says, can you fly an airplane, a 182? Okay? For you, you don't know what a Form 5, I'm speaking Greek to you right now, but that's basically, it's an FAA check ride. The same exact check ride that you get as a private pilot, in theory, is the check ride that you get coming on board with CAP. That allows you to fly the airplane. A Form 91 allows you to fly the airplane in all of these different conditions. Okay, all these different missions, all these. So, in my view, it is a much more important filter for me as a check pilot to know if you have great judgment. You have to have outstanding judgment to be a mission pilot. I'll just say that, okay? It really boils down to that. I mean, professionalism and judgment, all right? So, we talked about sector, we talked about expanding. Creeping line, okay? We know that the aircraft's route was from point A to point B, all right? And so it's basically this kind of a thing, where it's S's across the road. Anybody want to guess what altitude we're flying that at? Anybody want to guess what airspeed we're flying that at? Okay. All right. What's your power setting going to be? 19 inches of manifold pressure. Your flaps are going to be 10 degrees. So there's a lot of crossover here, right? Route search. What's the difference between a route search and a creeping line search? Well, I guess I'll tell you. Okay, a route search is same thing from point A to B. Here's the known flight path of the missing aircraft. We're going to offset by 1 mile, left or right, doesn't matter. And we're going to be looking along this route of flight, okay? So it's generally over a longer area. Creeping line, you might have some idea that it's in this next such and such area. Here, we might be flying from here to, let's just say, Ramona on a route search, okay? That might be even one of the first things that we do. By the way, let me just say this. On any search, when do you think that you actually start looking outside the airplane for the missing target? Say we have an LKP that's in Big Bear. When do you think you'd start looking out? Say if you were part of the search crew, the scanner observer. Well, the answer is the minute you take off. Because, believe it or not, we've had that exact scenario where we've had LKPs miles away from the airport. And the aircraft that had crashed was off the departure end at Palm Springs. Okay? That actually, I was not on that mission, but that is, in my CAP career, that has happened, where one crew after the next was taking off, going to look for somebody, and flying right over it because they weren't looking yet. All right, so a route search. ELT. Yeah, go ahead.
On a route search or a creeping line, does that generally take you over more than one sector? Is the sector pretty short?
Well, I don't know what you're talking about in terms of a sector. You mean a grid?
Grid sector, yeah.
Okay, so you're generally not confined to a grid if you're doing those types of searches. These are, we don't know where the airplane is. You have a more defined, once they get to the point where they think it's in this area, they start assigning out the grids, okay? Or maybe they're doing maybe they say, okay, at point B, they've got the grid search all the way up, but point A, where he took off, they're doing all these other things all the way up to that point.
And maybe dispatch with one plane keeping apart when they're doing.
Yeah, you wouldn't have two aircraft, one doing a creeping line and one doing a route search. You'd have maybe a creeping line for the first couple of miles off the departure end of the runway, and then a route search there until B. And before you got to the B area, there might be grids set up where they're looking for it. I don't know. It's every single time is different, so I don't know. But these are just, it's not that these are used in a certain sequence or a certain manner. I'm just saying, you know, these are all the ones you could potentially use, all right? ELT, the Becker. The Becker unit, okay, I'm not even going to go into all the technology of it tonight. That'll be for another night. But essentially, it's going to be broadcasting a position right here, okay, via a discrete signal that goes every 45 seconds, something like that. And then when you get close enough to it, it has a lower wattage signal that's actually a 121.5 signal. You can hear the audible yelp of the 120 or of the ELT. There's a azimuth on the Becker unit that tells you where the signal is coming from in terms of not a bearing to that signal, okay, but it's on an azimuth. So if it says, the azimuth says 360 at top, and then it goes around just like everything, 090180270, okay? So we have this in the aircraft. If the ball's at the top, that means it's ahead of you. The signal's ahead of you. If it's over here, okay, it means it's 90 degrees to the right. Okay, so it's a relative bearing is the word that I was trying to come up with. Okay, so we're getting relative bearing indications inside the aircraft in terms of where the signal is coming from. So if I'm flying along here, if I'm flying this way, I have a relative bearing that says it's ahead of me. The minute that I get past it, okay, that relative bearing inside the aircraft, it swings around and goes to the bottom. It says I've passed it, right? Does that make sense? I now have excluded everything on this side of the earth. Does that make sense? Now I come back this way, okay? And maybe at this point, when I get here, it swings around to the back. Now I've excluded all of this. Does that make sense? And I fly this way, and I exclude all of this. So it's a matter of exclusion. Am I making any sense? My wife says I'm a terrible teacher, so it's a lot easier to understand this when you're in the airplane. But essentially, you're flying a relative bearing. When it flips around, you know that it's no longer in front of you. You've excluded all of that space. Now you fly the opposite direction. You exclude all of the space to one side, and then you can define it. And like I said, most often times that we're looking for ELTs like this, where there's an airport environment, local. And so a couple of passes, and it's like, okay, well, it's obviously going to be at that airport right there. That would be how you fly a Becker. Wing blanking, what would be the most important thing to know about wing blanking? Well, how do you do a wing blank? Does anybody know? Okay, you tune in to 121.5 on a radio, right? And you're listening for the signal, and you're listening for a wing null, a null of the signal. Well, this is why you need to know here's your airplane, where your antennas are for your radios. Are they on the top of the aircraft or on the bottom? Makes a big difference, right? So as you're nulling, as you're wing blanking, and you're in a bank and your antennas are up here, and you're rotating around, here's the beacon right here, okay? You've lost the beacon right now. If it was on the bottom, you'd be picking it up, right? Well, the moment that you lose it, you know that it's at a 90-degree angle to you, okay? So there's one 90-degree, there's one angle. You come down here, do the same thing. Kind of speeding up right now because we're running out of time. It's a triangulation. You guys follow that? So you note the heading, add 90 degrees. That's where the signal is nulled, or that's where you think it's coming from. And then photography. Does it sound like you can get through all this mission pilot training in one day, by the way? Okay, I'm like blowing through it right here. So it is a lot, and that's kind of the point. There's a lot to learn here. But a lot of it can be learned in a classroom like this, or reading about it and knowing what to do in advance. You don't actually have to go out, and you can fly this in your mind before you get out there. Okay, so we have a point that we're usually taking a photo of. It might be a dam. It might be some kind of other infrastructure that we're trying to see if it might be radio towers, or, was it destroyed by fire? Like, for example, when they had that big fire up at San Jacinto, or Saddleback, excuse me, Charge are going up there to see if the CHP radio antennas were damaged and stuff, and taking high quality photos out there. We're going to definitely use our true headings here. We're also going to use our 1,000 feet. We're going to use our 90 knots and 10 degrees of flaps. And your aerial photography is going to be on your left-hand side. And you're going to want to fly a true east heading here. And this is where communication is really important with your AP. He or she has got to get an angle of 45 degrees, right? A perfect 45 degree shot, and perfectly perpendicular, right? And you have to be at 1,000 feet, and you have to be at a true heading. And there's wind involved, okay? So as you're coming across here, you'll be talking, and he'll be saying, closer or further out, and then usually I'll say something like, Mark, we're here. This is where we're at. He'll take the photo, and this time he'll look at it, or she'll look at it, but I'm already coming outbound here with a clover leaf, and I'm coming and I'm judging, so I'm setting him up for the next shot going north, okay? This is actually very difficult, I gotta be honest with you. I've practiced it a lot. It's still very difficult to do all this judging here and keeping all of this 1 mile, essentially. It's about a mile, 45 degree angle, 1,000 feet, 90 knots. So those are the patterns. I wanted to show you real quick, if we have 5 more minutes, on the iPad, how you can actually program some of this stuff in. Okay, so I wanted to say we're at K-Row right here, and we wanted to fly to grid 226 Bravo. How would I program that into the iPad? I would go CAP at LAX, that's our grid, or that's our chart, LAX. I believe it's 266, or did I say 226 or 266? Which one was it? 226 Bravo. CAP at LAX 226 Bravo. Return. It's now made a flight plan from Riverside. You can see that that's grid 226 Bravo. It's made a flight plan to the direct middle of that location, or of that grid. Okay? There is a mark there. It's marked on there. Now, what if we wanted to fly a parallel track search there? We go into search and rescue. We say we'll say grid aligned, okay? We'll say our initial track's going to be north. Initial turn's going to be right, track spacing in a mile, and a buffer of 0.2 miles. The buffer is the buffer from the edge of the grid. You don't want to fly outside that grid. Add to the route. And now you've got a perfect parallel track search north to south in that grid set up for you, okay? If you wanted to fly, let's just say, a sector search in that grid, you maybe set up the leg lengths as 2 miles, let's just say. Keep you inside the grid. Of course, I need to save it, sorry. It didn't save the, it set up at Riverside, but anyway, you can see what I'm doing. Let me just do that so that you actually know. Get rid of this here. Delete. Delete. Here's where you put the waypoint in, okay? You put in CAP at LAX 226 Bravo. You want to put the leg lengths in here, let's say 3 miles to keep us inside the grid, and add to the route. So there you go. Now you've got that. There's where you can use a sector search inside of the grid. You're not going to be going outside the grid, okay? And then lastly, you can program a last known position in your iPad. I've already done that here. And I'll just show you that if I go KROW to LKP, it'll give me a flight plan down there. I could do a procedure, and I could say, instead of the waypoint being that grid, I could say the waypoint is LKP, and I do a sector search there, and I've added it to the route. So it's just getting familiar with the way to use ForeFlight. I'd suggest that you guys fool around with this, but the main thing, the naming convention to get a grid in there is CAP at LAX, and then the grid number, 226 Alpha, 226 Bravo, whatever. And don't put in parallel track, because it will not stay defined in the grid. You have to say grid aligned. A lot tonight. Hopefully you guys, there's some interest that I didn't even get to really. We did a little photography. We didn't talk about O-rides. We didn't talk about WADs. We didn't really talk about CD. We did talk a lot about these other things. But there's a tremendous amount of flying that you get to do as a mission pilot. So I hope that all of you will take it seriously and do whatever you can to get in the left seat and help us out. We're short on mission pilots right now, and we need everybody. So, any questions? Yeah. So, once you fill out all these prerequisites, I can train you here at Riverside. I mean, there's a SARX that just ended down at Group 8, and as is common, they'll put out the extra funds on an email and say anybody that has training, call us and you can use those funds. So that's right now is our high operational tempo period, May through, I would say, the end of September. We're going to have training funds available out the wazoo. So if we have an airplane here, we can be flying every Tuesday, and you guys be getting that training. The only downfall is if I train you, then I can't give you a check. I can't give you a flight evaluation. So you have to go to somebody else for that. But it's better to get the training here and go to somebody else for a flight evaluation, because the training is what's hard to come by. So.
Yeah, and we're looking for CFIs, so we'll try to fast track you as fast as we can if you're a current CFI. Right. We'll train you, you train them.
Anybody else have any questions? If not, we'll go ahead and adjourn.
Just some comments online. They
Okay.
want to thank you. You can tell that this was planned well. Much better sound quality. Also love the split screen. Nice work.
Oh,
Did a lot of planning to pull that off, and everybody agreed, and it shows. So.
okay.
Lapel microphone.
This actually is a great idea. I don't know.
Really good idea.
Yeah, very nice. Mr. Tesla back here. He's,
So Lon, what's the update on the aircraft line?
Which one, 887?
Whatever is in the hangar, you know, is there any update? Do you
Yeah.
know anything different than, I thought we were supposed to swap airplanes, you know anything about that? Or why would it not get done?
Nobody has contacted me about the swap at all.
Nobody's contacted you?
As much information I know is
I-
what we talked about last.
I have
week.
not been contacted either, so.
Terry said something tonight about 887 was waiting on being flight qualified,
Now,
which
my-
means
my-
that it has to get the camera from Palm Springs. Apparently it doesn't have the camera in the back.
The camera in the road.
Yeah, I don't know, I mean, that's what I heard.
Yeah, the last I heard is that people from Fullerton were gonna fly to Palm Springs, pick that up, bring it over here, do the swap, put the stuff in the airplane, and everything would be fine. So, that has not happened.
Well, again, nobody has contacted me, so I don't know anything about it.
Yeah. Okay, well,
I updated the nav database tonight.
great.
I tried to update the other databases, but I got after an hour of waiting on one of them to download. I got tired of it, just quit it. So we was trying to download a newer version of the terrain worldwide database,
Oh my.
and apparently it's something in the subscription that we got now.
Okay.
But you know, I got up to after waiting an hour, it's up to 22%
Yeah, I was
download.
gonna say, maybe you could do it at home and bring the chip over here. to the-
No, I'd have to take the chip from the plane.
Yeah,
And
we
you
do
don't
that.
want to do that.
Don't do that.
All right, well, that's everything, and I'll get out of here.
All right, meeting is adjourned. You can turn the camera off now.
I think it was off, wasn't it?
No.
Just now cut.